Reynolds had it all. A successful career as a financial consultant, a cozy apartment in downtown Chicago, and the woman he was about to marry, Emily. Their relationship had always felt like a fairy tale, filled with laughter, shared dreams, and the promise of forever. After 3 years together, they were in the midst of planning their wedding. The engagement had been everything Aaron had hoped for. He dropped to one knee at a rooftop restaurant, surrounded by the city skyline, and Emily had said yes without hesitation. She was everything he thought he needed: ambitious, beautiful, and independent. And despite her occasional late work nights or social outings with friends, Aaron had always trusted her. It was a deep, unwavering trust that formed the foundation of their relationship. Or so he thought. But recently, things had started to feel off. There were subtle signs at first. Emily would be late for dinner. Her phone would be constantly buzzing with notifications that she'd brush off. He shrugged it off, telling himself it was just the stress of wedding planning, and that she was busy with her high-powered job as a marketing executive. But then came the moment that would tear their world apart. Aaron had always prided himself on the stability of his relationship with Emily. They had their disagreements like any couple, but they had always worked things out. It was what had made their bond feel unbreakable. So when the first small cracks started to appear, he brushed them off, convincing himself that everything was fine. The late nights, the sudden business trips she didn't mention, the unexplained phone calls. All of it seemed like normal stress from wedding planning, Emily's demanding job, and their busy lives. They were, after all, both ambitious, both driven. Aaron had always been the type to focus on his work, diving into spreadsheets and financial reports, leaving him little time to analyze the small changes in Emily's behavior. But as much as he tried to ignore it, a strange sense of unease began to grow inside him. It was a Friday evening, a week after he had brushed off his suspicions, when Aaron decided to take a different approach. Emily had texted him earlier, saying she had to stay late at the office to finish a project before the weekend. Aaron had planned to pick up dinner for the two of them and have a quiet evening in. But when he arrived at their apartment around 8 p.m., Emily wasn't there yet, and the apartment was eerily quiet. He set the bags of takeout down on the counter, not thinking too much of it. She was probably caught up in a meeting or still working late. Aaron made himself a drink, deciding to relax for a bit. He opened his laptop to check on some work emails. But then his phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily. "Hey, I'm running a bit late. I'm with a client at a bar for dinner, but I'll be home soon. Love you." Aaron frowned. She had never mentioned dinner plans. They had talked about ordering in, so why was she suddenly out with a client? His instinct told him something wasn't right, but he brushed it off, chalking it up to the stress of her work. He texted her back. "Okay, be safe. See you soon." But despite the reassuring tone of his message, his mind wouldn't let go of the nagging feeling that something was off. As the evening wore on, he couldn't shake the unease. He kept glancing at the clock, waiting for Emily to come through the door. It wasn't until almost midnight when she finally came home. The sound of her keys in the door was a relief, but it was also unsettling. She had barely made a sound when she entered, and when she walked into the living room, her eyes were glassy, as if she had been drinking. "Hey," Aaron said, his voice neutral. "How was dinner?" Emily seemed to hesitate, a faint flush creeping up her neck. She quickly dropped her bag by the door and smiled weakly. "It was fine. Just a long night, you know?" Aaron didn't miss the subtle shift in her demeanor, the way her shoulders were tense, the way she avoided his gaze. But again, he didn't want to jump to conclusions. She had been under a lot of pressure with her clients lately, and this was probably just a result of the stress. Still, something felt off. "I thought we were having dinner here tonight," he said, trying to keep his voice casual. Emily's eyes flickered for just a moment, and then she forced a smile. "I know, but it was one of those things, you know? A last-minute meeting. I didn't want to cancel on them." "I get it," Aaron replied, even though a tightness had settled in his chest. He wasn't angry, but something about her response didn't sit well with him. The tone of her voice was just different. As they sat down to eat, the conversation was stilted. Emily seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly, barely engaging in the conversation. Aaron couldn't help but feel a pang of discomfort as he tried to make small talk. He asked about her day, about her work, but her responses were short and absent, as if her mind was somewhere else. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Aaron turned to Emily. "Are you sure everything's okay? You've been kind of distant lately." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she rolled over and turned off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness. "I'm just tired, Aaron. It's been a long week." Aaron sighed, feeling the gap between them grow wider. He wasn't used to feeling like this. Emily had always been so open with him, so affectionate. But now it was like there was a wall between them that he couldn't break down. "I'm here if you need to talk," Aaron said softly, reaching out to brush her hair back from her face. But she didn't respond. He lay there for a long while, staring at the ceiling, wondering where things had gone wrong. He wanted to believe this was just a rough patch, a product of stress and wedding planning, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that maybe, just maybe, there was more to it than that. The next few days passed in a similar manner. Emily became more and more distant, retreating into herself. The conversations they once had with ease now felt strained, and her late nights at work became more frequent. There were moments when Aaron would reach out, try to reconnect, but she always seemed preoccupied, too busy, too tired. It wasn't until one Friday night, a week after Emily had come home late from the client dinner, that Aaron's suspicions were confirmed. He had just returned from a business trip, and as he entered their apartment, he noticed something strange. The door to Emily's bedroom was slightly ajar. Normally, she would have locked it if she was going to bed, but tonight, it was open just enough for Aaron to see a faint light flickering inside. He stood frozen, his heart hammering in his chest. The air felt thick with tension, and for a brief moment, he wondered if he should knock, give her space. But then he heard it. A man's voice. He couldn't make out the words at first, but he could tell it was someone on the phone, someone she was talking to. And then he heard it. Emily's voice, low and soft, as though she were speaking in secret. "I miss you too. I can't wait to see you again." Aaron's heart stopped. The words pierced through him like a knife. His mind raced as he tried to process what he had just heard. He couldn't breathe. Before he could even think, he turned and walked out of the apartment. He couldn't stay there. Not now. Not when everything he thought he knew about his life, about Emily, was falling apart before him. Aaron's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and hurt as he walked away from the apartment. He didn't even know where he was going. His feet moved on autopilot, taking him through the quiet city streets, but his mind was consumed with the horrifying truth he had overheard. "I miss you too. I can't wait to see you again." Emily's voice, the voice he had trusted with everything, now sounded hollow, a betrayal echoing in every word. He felt his heart breaking, not with the immediate sharp pain of shock, but with the deep, gnawing ache of knowing something had been irreparably broken. The woman he thought he knew, the woman he was planning to marry, was not the person he believed her to be. The future they had mapped out together suddenly seemed like a cruel illusion. Aaron walked for hours, aimlessly, as if the city itself could provide some kind of clarity. His thoughts looped back to the message he had found on Emily's phone just days before. The one from Jay, that unnamed, faceless man. Now it all made sense. Every small inconsistency, every late night and secretive glance, every time she had been too tired or too busy to talk. They hadn't been just coincidental. They had been red flags, warning signs he had ignored, unwilling to confront the possibility that his fiancée might be betraying him. The worst part was the feeling of utter helplessness. Emily's affair wasn't just an isolated mistake. It was a sign of a deeper problem, one he couldn't fix by himself. But still, part of him wanted to believe that she was in a difficult spot, that she didn't want to hurt him. It was hard to reconcile the woman he loved with the woman he now suspected of deceiving him. Maybe he had been too trusting. Maybe he had missed all the signs, and now it was too late to stop it. The feeling of betrayal wasn't just about Emily's actions, but about the trust he had placed in someone, only to have it ripped from him. The next day, Aaron barely slept. The gnawing ache in his chest was constant, and he couldn't bring himself to go back to their apartment. Every time he closed his eyes, he replayed the words he had overheard. It was hard to focus on anything else. Work seemed like a distant priority, and he had no interest in responding to his emails. His mind was consumed by thoughts of Emily. What was she thinking? Was she still seeing Jay? Was this all some grand deception that he had been too naive to see? At some point, he realized that he couldn't keep running. He needed answers. He needed to confront Emily, to get the truth straight from her. But as much as he told himself this, another part of him was terrified of the conversation that awaited. Could he handle hearing her explain herself? What would she say? Would she apologize? Would she blame him? By the time he mustered up the courage to return home, it was already late in the evening. He stood outside their apartment building for a long time, staring up at the lights in their window. It should have been a place of safety, a place that represented everything he had ever wanted. But now, it felt like a prison, the walls closing in on him, suffocating him with every passing second. As he entered the apartment, the familiar, comforting scent of home hit him, but it felt hollow now. Emily was sitting on the couch, her face drawn, tired. She was scrolling through her phone, but when she heard the door close behind him, she looked up, and their eyes met. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was suffocating, heavy with everything that had gone unsaid. Aaron tried to steady his breath. "We need to talk." Emily set her phone down, her expression flickering between guilt and uncertainty. She had always been the kind of person who could mask her feelings behind a smile, but now, Aaron could see the cracks beneath the surface. She had been caught in her lie, and there was nowhere to hide. "I know," she whispered. "I know, Aaron. I'm sorry." Her apology was the first thing she said, but the words felt empty, like they were just filling the air, trying to cover up something much deeper. Aaron's stomach churned with a mixture of anger and sadness. He wasn't sure what to feel anymore, but he wasn't going to let her dodge this. "Sorry." His voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room like a knife. "You're sorry." She looked down, her face twisting in pain. "I never wanted to hurt you, Aaron. I never meant for any of this to happen." "Then why did you do it?" His voice cracked, the pain too raw to ignore anymore. "Why did you betray me like this? I trusted you. I trusted you with everything." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but Aaron couldn't find it in himself to comfort her. I don't know. It wasn't planned. It just happened." "It just happened?" Aaron repeated incredulously. His hands were shaking at his sides, fists clenched as the anger he had been holding in finally surfaced. "You think that's an excuse? That's how you explain sneaking around behind my back?" "I don't want to lose you," she said, her voice trembling. "But I couldn't stop it. I wasn't happy, Aaron, and I didn't know how to tell you. I thought you'd leave me, that you wouldn't understand." Aaron felt like the floor had been ripped out from under him. "Not happy." His voice rose and he stepped forward. "We were planning a wedding. We were supposed to be building a life together, Emily. And you—" He broke off, unable to finish the sentence. The silence in the room grew unbearable. Aaron wanted to scream, to demand an answer, but part of him knew it wouldn't make any difference. The truth was already laid bare in front of him. Emily wasn't the person he thought she was. She wasn't the woman he was going to marry. "I don't know what happened," Emily said, her voice distant, as if she had already checked out of the conversation. "I've been trying to figure it out, but I didn't want you to find out like this." "Then why didn't you tell me the truth?" Aaron asked, his voice quieter now, as if the fight had drained him completely. "Why didn't you just tell me you were unhappy, that you didn't want this?" Emily's eyes filled with guilt as she slowly shook her head. "Because I was scared, Aaron. Scared of losing everything we had. But now I realize I've already lost it all." The pain in her words only made the hurt in his chest deepen. He had given her everything, and in return, she had taken that trust and shattered it into a million pieces. The weight of the moment hit Aaron harder than any physical blow. He had always believed that love was enough, that trust was the foundation of any relationship. But now he was forced to face the truth. Love wasn't enough to repair a broken trust. The damage had been done, and there was no undoing it. Maybe we can fix this, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe we can work through this, Aaron. Please, I don't want to lose you. Aaron took a deep breath, holding back the wave of emotion threatening to overtake him. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And in that moment, he knew the truth. There was no going back. The woman he had thought was his future had turned out to be someone completely different, someone he could never trust again. As he walked away from her that night, the finality of the situation set in. There was no fixing this. Emily's betrayal had torn apart everything they had built, and now Aaron was left to pick up the pieces of his broken heart. Days passed in a haze of confusion and hurt. Aaron barely slept, and when he did, it was filled with restless dreams of Emily's voice, of the distant and broken look in her eyes. He couldn't escape the painful image of her sitting on the couch, apologizing in a way that didn't feel genuine, in a way that felt more like an attempt to avoid the consequences. Each time he tried to focus on his work, the sharp sting of betrayal pulled his attention away. The vibrant energy he had once poured into his job had now drained away, replaced by a growing emptiness that echoed with every thought of Emily. Emily's attempts at reconciliation were constant, but Aaron's resolve only seemed to strengthen. She called, texted, and left voicemails begging him to talk, promising things would change. But each word she spoke felt like a rehearsed line in a play, an attempt to salvage something that could never be fixed. And while Aaron was no longer the same man who had once been so deeply in love with her, the pain of those first few days was still fresh, still raw, and it gnawed at him relentlessly. He wasn't sure what he wanted anymore. He wasn't sure if he even knew who Emily was anymore. The woman he had loved and trusted had betrayed him, and that cut deeper than he could have imagined. One evening, as Aaron sat in his apartment trying to collect his thoughts, a knock on the door startled him. He hadn't been expecting anyone, and for a moment, his heart skipped a beat. He knew it was Emily. He could feel it in his gut like a sixth sense. Sure enough, when he opened the door, there she stood, her eyes red and swollen, her face drawn with the weight of guilt. It was as if she had aged 10 years in the span of a few days. Emily was standing on the threshold of his life, her presence demanding attention, but also reminding him of everything he had already lost. I can't keep doing this, Emily said before Aaron could even speak. Her voice was shaky, a mixture of desperation and sorrow. Please, Aaron. I'm so sorry. I've never meant to hurt you like this. Aaron looked at her for a long moment, unsure of what to say. Part of him wanted to slam the door in her face, to end it all right there and walk away from everything they had been. But the other part, the part that still remembered the woman he had once loved, hesitated. He was torn between wanting to protect himself and wanting to give her one last chance. Why, Emily? Why didn't you just talk to me? Why did you have to go behind my back? Aaron's voice was calm, but beneath it, there was a fury that threatened to explode. I was afraid, she admitted, her voice trembling as she stepped into the apartment. I thought you'd leave me. I thought if I could just make the pain go away, if I could feel something else for a little while, I wouldn't have to face the reality that I was unhappy. I didn't want to lose you, Aaron, but I was already losing myself. Aaron felt a chill run through him at her words. She didn't want to lose me? He thought bitterly. But in the end, that was exactly what she had done. She had lost him. She had lost all of him when she chose to betray him, when she chose to hide the truth from him. You've already lost me, Emily, Aaron said quietly, feeling a cold weight settle in his chest. You lost me the moment you made that choice. Her face crumpled, and for a second, Aaron saw the woman he once loved. The woman who had been kind, gentle, and full of life. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who had lied, someone who had broken their vows without a second thought. I never wanted to hurt you, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I could fix things, that I could keep us together and still find a way to be happy. But I was wrong. I see that now. Aaron stepped back, running a hand through his hair in frustration. But you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. How could I ever believe anything you say now? She took a step toward him, her hands trembling, but he held up a hand to stop her. Please don't, Emily. Don't make this harder than it has to be, he said, his voice strained. You broke my trust. You broke everything. And no matter how sorry you are, that's something that can never be fixed. He could see the pain in her eyes, the genuine regret, but that was all it was, pain and regret. It didn't change what she had done. It didn't change the fact that Aaron's entire world had been turned upside down. He had been so sure of their future, of their love, and now it felt like a lie. She stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between them, before she finally spoke again. What do you want me to do, Aaron? Do you want me to leave? Do you want me to go? Aaron looked at her, trying to see beyond the tears in her eyes, trying to find something, anything, that would make him reconsider, but all he saw was the woman who had betrayed him. He knew the answer, even though it broke him to say it. I think you should go, he said, his voice cracking as he finally spoke the words he never thought he would say. It's over. There's nothing left for us here. Emily's face contorted in anguish as the weight of his words sank in. But she didn't argue, didn't beg him to reconsider. She simply nodded, her shoulders sagging as she turned and walked out of the apartment. The sound of the door closing behind her felt final, like the last nail in the coffin of their relationship. Aaron stood there for a long time, staring at the door as if waiting for her to come back, waiting for the love they had shared to magically heal everything. But it didn't happen. The door stayed shut, and he was left alone in the quiet apartment that no longer felt like home. The room felt cold, hollow. It was as if the very air had been sucked out of it, and he was left to face the harsh reality of his situation. The woman he had once loved, the woman he thought he would marry, was gone, and there was no going back. He had to face the truth now. There was nothing left to fix. And for the first time in days, he allowed himself to break down, to let the grief and anger flood out of him. It was as if the dam inside him had finally cracked, and he could no longer hold back the torrent of emotions. In that moment, Aaron realized that moving on wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. He had lost something, yes, but now he had the chance to rebuild his life, to find himself again. The road ahead would be long and painful, but one thing was clear. He couldn't keep holding on to something that was broken. And though it hurt more than anything he had ever felt before, he knew he had made the right decision. It was over. It had to be. The only thing left for him now was to start healing and reclaiming the life that Emily's betrayal had almost destroyed. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Aaron threw himself into his work, filling the void that Emily had left with endless hours at the office. But no matter how hard he tried to focus, the memories of their life together haunted him. The empty evenings, the places they had been, the quiet moments that now felt like echoes of a past life. It was as if he was walking through a fog, unable to see clearly, but knowing that the only way out was forward. And then, one evening, as he sat alone in his apartment, something strange happened. He felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, just a small ember in the darkness. But it was enough to remind him that even after all the pain, he could still move forward. That maybe, just maybe, he could rebuild his life one step at a time. The days that followed were a blur of rage, hurt, and disbelief. Emily apologized over and over, begging for forgiveness. She explained that it had been a mistake, that the affair with Jay had started out as a casual fling that she regretted. But Aaron didn't care. Every apology felt hollow, and every tear she shed felt like a dagger twisting deeper into his chest. He could no longer see the woman he had once loved in the person standing before him. She was a stranger now, someone who had shattered his trust, his love, and his future. Aaron had always prided himself on being a man of reason, but in that moment, he realized that reason had no place in this relationship. There was no fixing this. There was no coming back from this. After much soul-searching, Aaron made the hardest decision of his life. He ended the engagement. He packed his things, moved out of their apartment, and left the woman he thought he would spend the rest of his life with. As the days turned into weeks, Aaron slowly began to rebuild his life. He focused on his career, spending long hours at work, and found solace in the support of his friends and family. They had all warned him, in one way or another, about Emily's behavior, how her late nights and secretive actions were red flags. But Aaron had been blinded by love, unwilling to believe that the woman he had trusted so deeply could betray him. In the quiet moments of reflection, Aaron realized something important. Betrayal wasn't just about broken promises or lies. It was about the loss of self-respect. Emily's actions had been a wake-up call for him. He wasn't just a victim of her infidelity. He had also been allowing himself to be deceived, allowing someone else to dictate the terms of his life. In the end, Aaron knew that healing would take time, but the lessons he had learned were invaluable. Love wasn't about blind trust. It was about knowing your worth and never settling for anything less than the respect you deserve. And so, as he stood at the edge of a new beginning, Aaron made a vow to himself. Never again would he allow someone else's lies to define who he was. The past was gone, but his future was his own to create. The shattered illusion of love had been the hardest thing he'd ever faced. But through the pain, he found strength. And in that strength, he found a new sense of clarity. Love, he realized, starts with self-respect, and it was time for him to reclaim his own.